Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the official home of power analysis. A highly requested video to end out the week for you here. Going to be taking a look at analyst price targets. A very interesting discussion. Should be a great episode. Before we get into it, take a second, smash the like button, guys. Big help to myself and the channel. Anthony absolutely loves it. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join and let us know in the comment section below your price target for the companies mentioned and your top pick in the space. With that being said, let's get into today's video. All right, guys, away we go. At the end of another trading week, our second podcast of the day. We just got off our Power Play members only video. More on that to come later. Bitcoin itself, Anthony, giving us some real troubles here. We'll talk about the macro first, and then we're going to get into some Wall Street price targets, which is one of the most requested videos we've got over the last 2 years. So should be a great one heading into the weekend. That being said, Bitcoin not looking so great heading into the weekend.
Yeah, had a bit of a pullback this last 24 hours, and you can see there from the 5-day chart down, over 4%. So, as I say, zoom out a little bit. Weekend will be probably flat, and then we'll get Asia coming online Sunday evening from UK point of view, probably Sunday afternoon from your position, Bryce, in Canada. And that normally gives it a bit of a run, and then just wait till Monday for the American markets to open, because normally we have a bit of a pullback then. But as I say, you've got to be in for the long term. I've been buying Bitcoin for 6 years, haven't sold any yet, not like to sell in the near future, and adding regularly.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I liked Bitcoin at 126. I love Bitcoin at 83. You're getting a large discount. And if you've got that long-term conviction, really a no-brainer. Now, again, despite the volatility in Bitcoin price, we're seeing positive headlines. The big one out from the United States today: Trump has now officially selected Kevin Warsh as the new Federal Reserve Chair. So this is a big pivot from Jerome Powell. We know they obviously have a lot of conflicting views about interest rates, about Bitcoin. It looks like we're now going to have a pro-Bitcoin Fed and a pro-Bitcoin government.
Yeah, so obviously from a Bitcoin standpoint, a good appointment. The guy's conservative, and as you quite rightly say, another Bitcoin friendly, and most of the cabinet now are in the same position. So certainly from a Republican standpoint, I don't see any problems getting things voted through. But remember, that's only just over half the votes. The other half there on the other side might just want to put a spanner in the works and hold things up. But it's interesting because crypto's not political, and so therefore the 50,000 and therefore the 50 million people in America that have some sort of crypto, they're the voters, and I'm sure they'll want their representative to vote in the correct way.
And we know Dennis Porter's out there fighting the good fight on both sides of the aisle, so that's great. Now, we talked about Microsoft earnings yesterday on the podcast. A lot of excitement in the hyperscaler space about CapEx, investment, spending, infrastructure. This was an interesting one that caught my eye. AI startup Perplexity has now signed a $750 million deal with Microsoft for their Azure cloud service. So this is a pivot away from their sole Amazon partnership, and again, shows the demand for this type of infrastructure, for GPU access, and the amount of money that's flowing into this space.
Yeah, it sounds like a good deal. The 3-year commitment will let Perplexity deploy its AI models through Microsoft's Foundry service, including those made by OpenAI, Anthropic, and xAI, according to people familiar with the deal. But yeah, this is just a start. There's a lot of money coming into this space. We know that some of these big hyperscalers are going to spend an enormous amount in 2026, more than they spent in 2025, which for some of them was significant. I think we looked at Meta the other day. I think there was $83 billion spent in the last 4 quarters. You go back 2 or 3 years, you're seeing 3 to 4 billion, which is a significant drop from probably an average of 2025, and that's going to be increased in 2026 for the majority of these. And so hopefully some of this funding comes back into the space where the current Bitcoin miners and help them sort of like gain these necessary contracts to use their power towards a HPC solution.
Yeah, good point. And what I like to see here, we talk a lot about the spend, the cost, the amount of financing needed. This is actually the revenue side of the equation. So Perplexity, Anthropic, OpenAI, XAI, these are all customer facing tools and actually where revenue comes into the whole equation here. So nice to see as we move over to the miners. This is not nice to see, an absolute bloodbath. I don't know where you want to start on here, Anthony, but we're getting a real shakeup to end out the week.
Yeah, this is Bitcoin price is down a few percent, but the stocks are down, all in the red today. You can see even FUFU probably fighting that, only down 1.75%. But at the other end of the scale, some of the heavy hitters that we've talked about from a positive standpoint over the last 2 years, Cipher, Wulf, IREN, Hut also down, Riot also down, Wi-Fi. So those six companies there, all signed deals and all looking to expand and grow further, literally having the rug pulled today. And so, not necessarily on massive volumes, I'd say, though. There's no sort of like, this is a sell-off. I think it may be, a case of maybe some short action. I know some of the short action, some of these stocks was on the increase there, and people trying to get the share price down. So you've got these big institutions, the big banks can go in there and scoop them up at a much lower price there. So you've got to be careful about that. But yeah, IREN, got earnings coming out next week, and they've down nearly 11% today. But they've had a good run in January. Remember, post the all-time high when the share price traded, the highest close I think was just over $76. It dropped to $36 in the period after the all-time high, Bitcoin all-time high, and so people had the opportunity to buy it then. So today at 53.39, after dropped 11%, you're still in a good position if you manage to buy there, or buy earlier in 2025 when the share price is as low as $5.
Yeah, pretty incredible. And speaking of buying, I mentioned we just got off our members only power play video. We've been quiet for the first couple of weeks of January in terms of trades. That changed this week. You and I think, together deployed over $70,000 into companies, into stocks on this list. So if you guys want to see which stocks those were, feel free to check that video out. Again, members only power play just posted this morning. Now, in terms of housekeeping here, Mara, we were following the winter storm, the impact of that on global hash rate, on some of the miner daily production. They've come out with an official tweet from the company Twitter talking about this cold impact, the curtailment, and really catering to that domestic supply.
They have, and this week alone, they've curtailed 770 megawatts of mining operations during the winter storm. And this is what all the miners do. It's not just Mara. These miners are social responsible. I know there was a lot of FUD years and years ago about saying this mining operations, they just run 365 days a year, 24/7. And it's just about, using up energy, the size of a small country. I think Finland was the country named at the time, and it's not really true. I mean, the mining companies will use power to balance the grid. They'll use power when there's excess power available. And one thing they certainly do, and we've been to sites where you can see this happen, and it happens in seconds, they can switch off in seconds and give that power back to the grid to enable the domestic supply to be unhindered. And this is something that Mara have done. We know from the output recently, I think, our good friend, Financial Ernie, at one point, I think last week, said they'd only mined, maybe between 1 and 2 Bitcoin in a whole day. This obviously chart now shows you when you're switching off all your power, you're not going to be mining any Bitcoin. So, but they still operating, on days when they can mine. And the great thing is, unlike say an aluminium smelter or a battery factory where you can't just switch the power off in one go, power can be switched on and off at the speed of 10, 20 seconds on some of these sites, and we've seen it happen. You had the opportunity to switch down the machines at the Saluna sites, and I was there watching, and it was seconds, and then switching them back on again. It's the same time frame. So that's the great thing about it. You can take advantage of that. And miners don't just do it when there's cold weather. They do it when the price of energy increases. They can switch off really quickly, wait for the price to come back down to a more manageable level where they can make a margin, switch back on again, and take advantage of not having to pay high power charges throughout the day. And so great to see Mara come out and put this tweet out there. It's not all about we'll just mine all the time. It's about being that socially responsible. Make sure these homes are getting the heating that they require during these cold snaps.
Yeah, and that's the real benefit of this flexible load, as you say, turned on or off just like a light switch. It'll be interesting to see at the end of the month how these miners perform. It's going to be difficult on the revenue side of things in terms of Bitcoin price and potentially on the production side of things based on this curtailment. Now, moving on to the main event, you and I, by nature, don't do price targets. We don't do buy-sell recommendations. We leave that to the experts, Anthony. But fortunately for us, over the past few years, we've gotten to know many of these Wall Street analysts on a personal level. We thought today would be a great way to celebrate that. Go in, take a look at all of the recent analyst price targets, the upgrades, downgrades, the midpoint, the consensus as we approach earnings season here, and really position us from a Wall Street lens in terms of what these analysts are looking for from these share prices. So we've randomly selected about half of the miners, essentially every other miner in terms of market cap. We'll do part 2 next week. But kicking things off, Anthony, Saluna Holdings, one analyst currently covering. You'll notice more analysts as the market cap increases here. A consensus of $5, and the analyst that actually is following Saluna, near and dear to our heart.
Yeah, Kevin Deedy is the analyst in question, and Kevin should have come on that tour of Texas that we did in the beginning of November. And it's interesting to note that we obviously did our podcast on a daily basis from every site that we visited, and we did a great one for the Soluna site there at Silverton, which highlights Dorothy 1, Dorothy 2, and where Project Grace is going to be situated as well. Fantastic site. And it's interesting that he put out his price target literally a few days after that podcast came out. So whether he got the chance to see it and get more information, because we were highlighting a lot of the good stuff that happens on these sites. At the time of his announcement, the share price was about $1.60. It's about $1.10 today. It has been significantly higher. It's been, in the $3 to $4 range, just over 3 months ago. So when the Bitcoin was about 126,000, Soluna shares were doing quite well. It's pulled back since then. It is quite a volatile stock, and I think that's because people are uncertain. They'll buy into it, and then they're uncertain about. But one thing I'll say about Soluna is they come out with an update on a weekly basis. They're one of the most transparent miners out there. And so John Bellazera, who's the CEO, who's been on the podcast many times. If you're unsure about, Soluna, go and have a listen to one of those podcasts and listen to what he says. He doesn't hold back. He even has an Ask Me Anything session on a monthly basis where shareholders can just write in their questions, and he goes and answers all of them. So I'm quite impressed with the setup there. We've been to one of their biggest sites. We've seen the table of all the projects that they've got. We've covered them on the podcast quite a lot of times. $5 from Kevin Deedy. He knows a lot more about price action than we do, and so let's see how that goes over the 2026 period.
Yeah, compared to the current share price, a pretty good upside potential there for Soluna. Now, moving over to BitFuFu, they've got 3 analysts currently covering 2 buys, 1 hold, and a range anywhere from $5.50 to about $7.
Yeah, and we've covered a bit FUFU for the last 2 or 3 months actually on the channel, and we were so interested when we met them for the first time. We met Charlie at the HC Wainwright conference, and to be honest with you, that's probably the best conference that me and you've attended in the last couple of years as we've been doing this. And the reason for that is the fact that it was absolutely from a mining position. We had 16 presentations to listen to, and actually we said after that week, one of the top presentations we listened to was Charlie giving a presentation on BitFuFu. We didn't know much about the company. We knew it did some mining. We got to learn a lot more during that presentation. We've covered them on the channel many times. They've also been a feature miner on the newsletter, which goes out weekly. So if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, do that. You'll get a newsletter every week with lots of information. We cover a different company every week as a highlight. So we do a little bit of an information on a company each week. So I pay attention to that there. the stock here is it's giving, like I say, giving three targets there from 5.50 and 7. The current share price is at $2.77 at the moment. Just a caveat to that, there's no price targets for 2026 in here, so these were towards the end of last year. But I'd be paying a little bit of more attention to BitFuFu when you look at these companies over the last 3 or 4 years and find out who's been delivering regular quarterly profits. There's not many companies that can say that, but BitFuFu are one of them that probably can say that. And it's this strategy of the cloud mine that's really heightened that, Bryce.
Yeah, it has. And we've talked about this extensively on the channel. You can see in their most recent deck nearing 650,000 registered users on the cloud mining platform. And again, based on that ban in China on Bitcoin mining, really giving a lot of the Asian market access to mining, maybe if they can't do that in a physical sense. So BitFuFu, again, one to watch as we go into 26. It'll be interesting to see as these analysts from Wall Street start to upgrade their targets or outlook after earnings here. Now, moving over to Hive, the largest in terms of follows that we've seen so far, 8 analysts, 7 buys, 1 hold. And I'll note here, we have seen a couple of recent changes in 2026.
Yeah, there have been some upgrades in 2026. Obviously, we know a lot about Hive. They've got the hash rate up to 25 exahash, looking to increase that to 35 exahash. They're already at $20 million in terms of AR. That's looking to get to 140 million AR by the end of this year and 225 million by the end of 2027. And we've covered that in many of our podcasts before. So this dual strategy seems to be working out. The share price at the moment, $2.67. So even the low, and that's a recent low that's coming there of $3.50, still a nice premium on that and there. And, if the $10 one's anywhere near to be right, you've got plenty of potential with Hive. Remember, they don't do things on a massive scale very, very quickly, although they have grown hash rate in 2025. On a par with what sort of IREN and CleanSpark were doing the previous years. Maybe not as quickly as Bitdeer, but Bitdeer do produce their own machines. That would give them a little bit of credibility for that there. But Hive is sort of like they'll tend to do things in a more managed way there. They don't go and tend to borrow the earth. They'll get the funding they need. They'll grow. They're going to start buying a lot of GPUs for some of their sites, and they've got a potential big co-location deal, 70 megawatt co-location deal at one of their Canadian sites. So a lot of optimism here, and you can see that's why they've got 8 analysts looking into them and some nice targets there as well. But again, consistently do your due diligence on these companies to make sure you're fully aware of what you're buying into.
Yeah, it's a good point. And on that note, you'll notice this is all from tip ranks in terms of where these Wall Street targets are coming from. You can see they do analyst ratings. So also worth noting, similar to what we say with our data tables, you don't want to look at one metric in isolation. You also don't want to look at one Wall Street analyst's opinion in isolation. And you'll see a large spread there, both in terms of the ratings. Some are 5-star, some are 1, and in terms of the actual price targets that they give out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good thing is we've met most of these analysts. Back in 2024, we visited Denton facility when they announced a 200 megawatt deal with CoreWeave. And the following day, we went to Corsicana. And the bus took a load of the Wall Street guys along there, so we got to meet them on the bus down there. So some of these names are very, very familiar to us. We do catch up with them at various conferences, so we get to know them, and it's interesting now to see their targets coming out, with great regularity. It's not once a year, these targets. They're put out generally maybe two a quarter even.
Yeah, they do fairly frequent, and you'll see KBW. We've talked about some of their upgrades, downgrades throughout the week on the podcast, but keep an eye on that one as well. Now, American Bitcoin, this is a little interesting. Again, relatively large market cap compared to some of these other companies. Only one analyst currently covering ABTC, again, with a buy rating and a $4 price target.
Yeah, just the one analyst, which is interesting, really, because you've got 2 sons of the president are advisors, senior advisors to the company, and so that might have created a bit more interest. You look at the price today, stock price there, $1.48. So some potential upside here at that $4 rating there, but bear in mind just one rating at the moment. We have highlighted American Bitcoin this week already on the podcast in terms of, the fact they've growing that hodl really nicely in the top 18 now of all companies with Bitcoin on the balance sheet from a public point of view there. Growing that hash rate over 25 exahash and looking to sort of achieve growth in Bitcoin through the various levers that they've got to do that.
Yeah, exciting to see that story continue to progress, and we expect them to make their way up that leaderboard as we move through 2026. Now, moving over to Bitdeer Technologies, they've actually got 11 Wall Street analysts covering the story, a strong buy as the consensus, 10 buys, 1 hold, and an average price target of $30.
Yeah, this has been an interesting time for Bitdeer. 2025 saw them grow their hash rate all the way from 8 exahash to a total of over 70 exahash when you include their hosting business as well. But now they are effectively the largest mining company with a hash rate, about 10 or 12 exahash ahead of Mara in second place. They also produce their own mining machines now, and we've started to see the SealMiner A3, which is their 3rd edition miner, coming out in a very, very short space of time from the first one. Normally, there's usually a gap between these, but they've come out fairly quickly, and they're already testing the SealMiner A4. They've done 1 test, and they're now going to do a further few more tests there. So they've literally got 1 model coming out, and they're trying to even make a more efficient one to join it. And so you've got to take your hats off to them. Share price today, $12.91 as we speak. But look at the targets there, a low of 14 all the way up to $40 there. And 11 ratings. That tells you the analysts like Bitdeer. They also have significant sites that they are either energized at the moment or about to energize in 2026. Some of the largest power that's actively being developed or already in operation. I think they've got the largest in operation. And if they actively get the rest of it developed, they're going to have over 3 gigawatts of power by the end of this year or beginning of 2027 as they complete that. And the majority of that could be aimed towards HPC. And so I think they've got all the right strategy in place there. They've got 2 sites of HPC at the moment, showing that they can produce this actual process. And all you need to do then is scale those up in other regions there across the world. They operate in 4 different continents. So it'll be interesting to see how 2026 is. 2025 was a fantastic year. 2026 could be a great year. And those targets there probably reflect what happened in 2025.
I was going to say, we saw Bitdeer, I think, up close to $24 in the fourth quarter of last year. So 30 definitely within reach. We've been fortunate to go down to Bitdeer's Rockdale site, and they literally have the aisles ready to go for the seal miners when they show up. So that one's going to be interesting to watch. Again, KBW, the only analyst of 5 in 2026 to give a hold. All of the others are buy. So again, take that with a grain of salt. As we move now over to Mara, this was formerly the largest market cap miner in the sector for years and years. They've now retreated a little. They've got 10 analysts currently covering the story. I will note no sells on Mara. They've got 7 buys, 3 holds, and an average of $21 price target from Wall Street.
Yeah, $21 price target. That's the average. Today's price, $9.43. So plenty of potential there, even if half the analysts were sort of like getting it right. A high target of 30, and that might come along if they sort of like get the Exion deal and provide more color to what their HPC strategy looks like going into 2026, 2027. Remember, sort of in 2027, they can start probably purchasing some of those hosted sites. They own about 70% of the power at the moment. There's another 30% which is being hosted, but I think they've got the opportunity to buy those sites in probably about 18 months' time. So that will give them well over 1.2 gigawatts of power, looking to expand that potentially on some of the sites they currently have, where you can grow the power to potentially 1.8 gigawatts. And if you think about, that level of power to deliver HPC, the future could be really good for Mara. But we want to see more color from their updates. One thing about them is communication is not as frequent as some miners, and so you're left waiting for a little bit more information sometimes. Hopefully that changes. We get fed on the channel, the Exxon deal gets signed, and then share price can start moving back there and get Mara's market cap back to where it was during the sort of the Bitcoin bull run in 2025.
That's the goal, yeah. And they put out an update today on that 64% stake in Exxon that's still pending and subject to regulatory approvals. So we were expecting something in Q4. Hopefully in Q1 here, we hear an outcome on the Exxon deal. Now, you just mentioned the communication. Core Scientific, this is interesting. They've got a $27 price target, 10 analysts covering the company, a strong buy. We've seen a number of upgrades or reiterates in 2026. However, the company itself has not put out a press release since October 30th.
No, it's been on effectively radio silent since the date that the retail investors or shareholders decided to vote against the deal with CoreWeave, the potential acquisition by CoreWeave. And they didn't just vote, they voted with their feet because I think it was 90% voted against that deal. And you know, even if you felt it wasn't a great deal, you might find more people sort of voting for it, but no, it was quite clear. We highlighted it all the way through that, about what the deal's worth to shareholders. We had our table there, how that floating share price affected the deal. And it became obvious, weeks before that, the no vote was going to succeed. I even bumped into the team in the AIM Summit about a week before the vote was due to come out, and they were sort of like, not convinced it was going to go through at that point in time. And you would get a lot of rumblings then because they'll be speaking to analysts, and some of these companies some of the big banks have big positions in these companies. So if they're going to vote their 5 or 6% of shares, and I know there's some big holders of Core Scientific. Again, when we went down on that trip to Denton there, we spoke to some of the analysts, and some of them were the largest holders of Core Scientific stock as well. So there was an interest there. I do like the price target. Share price today, a smidgen under $18. So some potential upside here. And bear in mind, they've got the biggest contracts out there, 590 megawatts of compute power towards HPC. They've still got about another gigawatt of power that they can probably utilize over this next 12 to 18 months. So maybe more deals on the table. Remember, CoreWeave have just had that influx, or again, that influx of $2 billion from NVIDIA. Maybe some of that flows back into the deal, and they sign up more sites. They've got a great relationship with Core Scientific. Things got behind it towards the end of last year in terms of getting the GPUs installed in a sort of like project time frame. But it looks like December they were really trying to catch up in that. Saw a lot of GPUs being installed, and on a couple of days there, it suggested that there was over 2,000 GPUs installed in a single day. So great to see that. Great to see, the fact that we're getting information, albeit we're getting information from CoreWeave, not from Core Scientific. So hopefully we can change that. Get Adam on the podcast. Give us a 2026 outlook. Let us know what's been going on. We know they've probably got their heads down trying to get things moving and not focusing on distraction from outside. But I think now we're in 2026, earnings coming up there. We need some sort of a communication from the company to sort of like say, yeah, we're hanging on to the tiller, we're going in the right direction, and this is what's happening, and this is what the potential looks like over the next 18 months.
Most definitely. Adam, if you're watching, you're welcome anytime. We'd love to get an update on Core Scientific. Now, moving over to Hut 8, this has really been one of the standouts in the last few quarters. Asher and team have taken this company to an all-new level. You can see 14 analysts covering a strong buy across the board, all 14 analysts with a buy rating, and even our friends at KBW, they've given an upgrade, a buy, and increase the price target. So remember, ABTC, only one analyst covering, Hut 8, 14.
Yeah, and Asher, the CEO, obviously, he's had the spotlight on him for the last few years since he's taken over that role there, and basically described how he was going to grow the company. when he took over the role and say, don't judge me now, give me 9 months, I'm going to put my strategy into place, then judge me how we're done. And we did judge him in 9 months. He did get an A mark on his homework, and he's carried on since then. And you can see the fact now that they've created their subsidiary of ABTC and quite clearly identified the strategies that both companies will sort of like focus on. Hut8 itself just landed a major deal before Christmas there, and the margins are extremely good margins. I think it was 99% of net operating income. Please, Asher, if I'm wrong, let me know. I think it's 99% net operating income, and so that's just part of the power. If you look at their portfolio and look at the pipeline of portfolio, they've got the biggest pipeline out there now that Griffin Mining are no longer available. And bear in mind, Hut8 took over Griffin Mining, so maybe they took over that pipeline from them. But I think it's heading towards, I think it was like 9.5 gigawatts last time I saw it. Now, that's not all sort of like, there's still lots of hurdles to get through to get to that there. But they have quite a lot of power online. I think it's 1.2 gigawatts, and they've got some power that's in development. And they do highlight all the various stages that they're into. And it gives you some indication of the types of conversations that they're having about approvals, about getting things moving that way. But it looks like the future's bright. The analysts obviously love them. There's 14 analysts covering this stock here. One of the most popular stocks on Wall Street, with a high target there of 83.97. The share price did hit, I think, a high of about $67. Currently today it's $56.70. So there's plenty of potential there with those price targets to have a look at this company and maybe add it to your portfolio if it fits what you're trying to achieve yourself.
There you go. Yeah, and pretty impressive returns from Hut in 25. We'll see if that continues in 26. Now, leaving, I guess, the best for last, the top market cap company that we cover on the channel, still showing Iris Energy on tip ranks. We know them as IREN. Fortunate to go down to Childress. The big story here, obviously earnings, Q2 earnings next week on Thursday, same day as Amazon. 12 analysts currently covering IREN. Interestingly enough, the only sell rating we've seen in today's episode belongs to IREN, an average of 82.80 in terms of the consensus price, and again, a favorite on Wall Street.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I think it was April 2024 when they chose changed the name to IREN. So tip ranks really have had an opportunity to maybe change that in the last 21 months. So if you're watching tip ranks, update your website there. It's quite surprising when you think about the last I'm going to say the last 18 months, maybe even 2 years. The focus has been really on IREN in terms of the retail market there. There's been a lot of new shareholders coming into the space. They like what they see. I was covering IREN on my own, 4 years ago. Nobody else was covering IREN in the space. They were half an exahash. Dan had contacted me and said, would I like to include them? And obviously I did. And I was doing my normal, and a lot in them days. I was doing a lot more analysis. I was doing a lot more articles with Compass and highlighting the comparisons. And to be honest with you, all the way through that, you can go back and look at those articles that are on the Compass website. A lot of comparison articles between these big mining stocks, and generally IREN came out on top. And it wasn't one metric. I was using probably 14, 15 metrics. And you want to be using a handful of metrics. Don't just pick one out and think, that's great, I'm going to buy because it's what, you can't do that. I can make every miner we've discussed today be the best miner from one metric. Seriously, it's not hard to do. And, once you've been to some of these conferences and you get the CEO of the company and they talk about their own company, you think their own company was the best company in the world and they're selling that company there. When you do your analysis, cover all the angles, cover all the different metrics. You've got valuation metrics, you've got operational metrics, cover them all in detail. The analysts here, they obviously do a lot of work themselves. And if you're very fortunate to ever see any analyst update papers where they actually don't just give you a price target, they tell you how they calculated that price target, what's driving that price target in terms of forward EBITDA, over revenues. and do some sort of financial calculations to deliver that price target. It's not a made up number. They know what the expectation is. If your revenue is going to be this amount here and your margin is going to be this amount here, you can sort of plug that into calculations and determine a sensible price target based on multiples. And that's what these companies do there. But you can do your own due diligence and mirror it and just make sure that you're happy before you invest. But these last 2 years, IREN's been the most focused of all the companies that we've discussed on the channel. And it does surprise me that there's even one sell there. We haven't had a sell today on any of the other miners. And I'd be thinking there might be a couple of sells on some of the other miners before you get to IREN. But Reggie's from JP Morgan has reiterated this on a podcast as well. So interesting, we might get him on the power mining. Interesting, we get him on the power analysis podcast and see if he can really talk us through what his thought process is. We've been to the Childress site. I'm not sure if Reggie's been himself yet. It's an amazing setup there. It's like a small town. Everything they've done the last 2 years has happened exactly as they planned it to be, and I don't see that changing over the next 2 years. And when you think in 2 years' time, they're going to have over 3 gigawatts of power available to develop towards HPC, and they've only literally got 200 megawatts of compute power at the moment with a fantastic deal. Just think when the remaining 2.5 gigawatts gets plugged in for HPC, what that's going to deliver. So I'd be looking at the high target there, $136. There's been a few significant three-figure forecasts for this company in the last sort of 3 or 4 months. And when you saw the price last year move from $5.13 all the way up to an intraday high of about $80, that tells you a stock to look out for. Hopefully 2026 carries on. Earnings is next week, so there'll be a lot of information for earnings there. But as I say, before you buy any of these mining stocks, make sure you carry out your own due diligence first.
Most definitely, yeah. And I was going through some screenshots from when we first started. You can see IREN in the single digits. So if you've been watching the channel for the last few years, hopefully you jumped on this one. Reggie bucking the trend here, along with Jim Cramer, who also came out with a sell on IREN, and we know how his track record looks. But you're quite right. Earnings next week. All eyes on Q2 from IREN. Now, as I said in the intro, Anthony, you and I don't do price targets, but we've come to know many of these Wall Street analysts. Obviously, very intelligent, well-researched, well-put-together reports, and it's nice to take a step back every once in a while and look at what other analysts in the space are putting forward in terms of their targets.
It is, and we can sort of have a review of these in maybe 4 or 5 months' time and just see how they manage, and then we can do our own interpretation of how good some of these analysts are there, because they do put out a lot of updates. A lot of those names that you saw, one stock there were on many of the stocks, so you can start getting a feel for these analysts. Are they consistently getting it close, or are they consistently getting it away there? Maybe make our own sort of our own table of how we score the analysts, and based on their projections. Maybe that's something we can do in a podcast there. But let us know what you think in the comments about what we've just covered in terms of those targets there. Are they in line with what you're thinking? Do you think they're too high, too low? Let us know your thoughts there, bro.
Yeah, I would like to hear that in the comment section. And keep in mind, part 2 of price targets will be out next week. We'll be covering all of the other stocks or companies that we didn't get to today. Now, the final piece here, a little bit of welcome news. Hash price, you can see on Hashrate Index, courtesy of Luxor, is sub 40. However, the global hash rate significantly down from that 7-day average we talked about a few weeks ago, now in the 800 and change range. Also, difficulty adjustment lining up for potentially one of the largest difficulty reductions we've seen to date.
Yeah, and a couple of things, Stephen, for that. Obviously, the cold weather is impacting there. We just highlighted how much Mara impacted Mara, and it impacted IREN and CleanSpark and many of the other miners as well. We're switching off to give the domestic supply an opportunity to go on with power during those cold periods there. But that's effectively like a 20% drop in network hash rate there. It was way over 1 exahash, 1 exahash 50. Now it's dropped 210 in a very short space of time. It's taking nearly 12 minutes to mine a block at the moment. It's supposed to take 10 minutes. So as you can see, That needs to come down by nearly 20%. And the difficulty adjustment, 15.9%. I'm afraid it's going to be fairly short-lived because, as we start getting into the more less cooler months there, machines will be able to operate it a bit more freely, and people won't be requiring to have the heating on as much as they did maybe in the likes of December and January and maybe parts of February. But once we get into, say, March, you'll see probably that hash rate start to get back to where it was, and then you'll see the difficulty go the reverse way. And again, it's this cycle here until the Bitcoin price really rallies. It's going to be a challenge. And $83,000 when this chart is produced there, that's not enough. $37, even with that, that hash rate at the moment, $37 is the hash price. Not many miners are making any margin really out of that. They're probably, covering the power costs and a few of the direct costs there, but not all the costs would be able to be afforded from that sort of hash price.
No, a little bit of struggle there. And again, we're looking forward to hearing about those results in Q4 in the coming weeks. So a lot of excitement in the space as we head into earnings. Now, before we let you go, we did want to bring up the leaderboard from Miner Madness. We're about a month in now to this 3-month competition. You can see some impressive returns despite maybe the pullback we talked about in the last 2 days of trading.
Yeah, so this leaderboard is taken from the close last night. And, based on what we've just been witnessing today in the markets, hopefully some of those, will still be at the top. I've just looked at the live leaderboard now, and Steve Klopp is still top there, but the percentage gain is down to 34%. That's how bad today's been. But still a fantastic return. Remember, we're still on the 30th of January. The competition's only been going for 4 weeks. Just finished the 4 weeks now. And, to have a return of over 30%, and there's probably the top 10 in the competition have achieved that. That's a fantastic return in a short space of time. Great to see, IREN, Riot, Cipher, Cores all having, a lot of names at the top of the leaderboard there, but some good returns overall.
Most definitely. And as I just mentioned, we finished up our Power Play members only video just a few hours ago. Over $70,000 of purchases this week alone between yourself and I, Anthony. So make sure you guys check that out. Thanks so much for watching here today. Hit the like button. We'll see you back here on Monday.